Hi everyone, and welcome to the Solarplaza webinar that we're hosting for the Balkan region. I'm very excited to have you all join me today, but even more excited for the speakers that will be here discussing the regulatory framework for solar in the Balkans. But before we go into the presentations and the discussions, I want to let you know a little bit about how this webinar is going to go. Myself, I'm a project manager at Solarplaza, and I'll be facilitating the conversation, but we'll be kicking things off with short presentations from each of our speakers focusing on some key region or key country in the Balkans, and afterwards we'll be doing a joint discussion and answering your questions. In case you're not aware, Solarplaza, we are a conference organizer. We host events across the globe about solar energy, and it's our business to accelerate the sustainable energy transition. Please check out our events. We're always happy to host and potentially see you in person. In case also you're not aware, we have certain products such as the Solarplaza Consultancy. We also have the Solarplaza Foundation that we work on to accelerate the sustainable energy transition for all, and it's something that I invite you all to check out. Now, why are we hosting this webinar today? Later on in the year in Bulgaria, in Sofia, perhaps that's where Dimitar is right now, we'll be hosting our Solarplaza Summit Balkans. And in order to have you prepared and have a good framework of what we're going to be discussing, we'd like to delve deep into the regulatory framework and get the conversation started. So if you'd like to continue the conversation potentially with the speakers in person, then I invite you to also check out the event and potentially come to us in Sofia. And now this really is the point where if you have any questions or any technical difficulties, we're here to help you out. So there should be a chat box on the right where you can put in any technical issues. You put it on that question box and also your questions. And I ask you, the audience, to please put in your questions throughout the webinar. We'll try to get through all of them if we possibly can. And there's no need to wait until the end. But I urge you to ask the questions you want to our speakers. And speaking about our speakers, I'd like to give them a little bit of time to introduce themselves, but you can also later on read them here in the slides. First off, Sasha, I'd like to give you the floor. You're a partner at Wolf-Thys, and maybe a short introduction on what you're doing in the solar market.
Yes, hello, good morning. This is Sasha Jovicic from Wolf-Thys Zagreb office. I'm a partner here in charge of projects, energy and infrastructure. Have been doing renewables for the past 10 more years, so predominantly in all parts regarding things from permitting to M&A to any other point that may come up in the legal arena for renewable projects. Very happy to be here and very happy to try and tackle any questions you may have.
Thank you, Sasha. And then I'll move on to Petar Mitrovic, a partner at Karanovic and Partners, and please take it away with a short introduction as well.
Hi, thank you, Lorena. Thank you for having me today. Good morning, everybody. My name is Petar Mitrovic. I'm a partner at regional legal practice Karanovic and Partners, in charge for work of the regional energy and natural resources industry group. I'm based in Belgrade, but covering the entire region of former Yugoslavia plus Albania. We've been active in energy projects from the very beginning of private initiatives in the sector, so have been following the developments for quite some time and still are. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Dimitar, I'd like to also to give you the floor to introduce yourself. You're an attorney at law at Schooner, and take it away.
Thank you, Lorena. I'm Dimitar Kairakov. I'm an attorney in Schoner practice in the energy sector. I have been with Schoner for 7 years, and we've been involved in numerous energy transactions and projects throughout the years in the renewable sector and especially in solar. So happy to be here and share what we can with the audience. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, now we'll kick it off with a few short presentations from each of you. So I'd like to invite Sasha and Petar to go away for a little moment, since Dimitar, you'll be starting us off. And I'd like to assure the audience we'll be sharing the slides and the recordings of this webinar after the webinar, so you don't have to stress if we're going too fast. But Dimitar, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Lorena. So For Bulgaria, I think the biggest development in the renewable energy sector is the much awaited amendment into the Energy from Renewable Sources Act. The National Assembly voted the amendments this Friday, and they're supposed to be promulgated shortly in the State Gazette. Unfortunately, for this webinar, we don't have the final provisions of the law, but based on the reports that was sent to the National Assembly, I think we can make some overall uh, discussion about the most important amendments. And I think we should start with the grid connection procedure, which is basically the most important issue, I think, for every investor into that sector. It's important to know here that there were many proposals on how to structure the grid connection procedure because initially the bill was sent in the parliament with the idea to accelerate the procedure and skip some steps, I would say. But at the end of the day, the procedure was more or less remained the same. What I mean is that it is a three-step process. You get a grid connection statement from the grid operator as a first step, then you get a preliminary connection agreement, and then you get a final connection agreement. And these three steps based on what is publicly available right now, remained in the law. So in terms of big acceleration in the grid connection procedure, this won't be happening. In my view, what is added and what will be important here is that there will be grid bonds based on the requested capacity for connection to the grid. And the grid bond is set at 50,000 Bulgarian leva or approximately 26,000 euro per megawatt of requested capacity. And the idea here is to solve one of the probably the biggest issues we had with grid connection. There were a lot of applicants to get grid capacity in the past. However, very few projects from those applications actually got realized because most of the applicants just wanted to get a grid connection statement and capacity and to sell the project without having any real intention to develop such projects themselves. Right now, we hope that this could change with the introduction of a bond where only real investors will actually apply and develop their projects. Other change that was introduced in the law was the so-called centers for administrative service in the investment process. The idea being that investors will have easier access to all the complexities in the investment process, and these complexities will be explained by officials in the respective municipality where the project will be developed. I think here everybody is a bit skeptical about about the results regarding this measure, because in practice this doesn't change much. Even before this measure was introduced, the applications for construction permit were submitted to the respective municipality. Now we just change the fact that there will be a special, let's say, department into every municipality that will be able to handle the investment process for renewables. Unfortunately, I do not see a big improvement in the investment process here. We have tried to actually set deadlines for the development process that are in line with the EU electricity directive. which are 2 years for larger projects and 1 year for projects that are below 150 kilowatts. However, there is a detail here that should be explained, that I think that the EU electricity directive actually meant to shorten the permitting process and all the permits that need to be obtained in order to develop the renewable installation. But in our law, these periods of 2 years and 1 year, respectively, for the permitting start to expire at the moment the developer submits the application for the construction permit. And this means that at this point, the most difficult part of the permitting process is already achieved, and the respective periods are actually applying for the time where the construction of the power plant will be happening. And at this point, it is up to the developer, and there is no permitting hurdles regarding the construction of the installation. So here again, I think there were good intentions behind such measure, but its practical implications, I think, won't be that good. Maybe with the development of under the law, there is a provision that there will be a guideline which will be developed and publicly available for each developer and investor to review. If this guideline is made really well and actually is applied by all the municipalities in the same way without any differences, so that there is stable practice how the development process works. This could be a good measure, and it can actually help accelerate the permitting process. Another topic here was the repowering of existing installations, and here we have some improvements in the sense that where the installed capacity of the installation is not increased, there will be no necessity for a connection procedure with a grid operator. Also, if the installed capacity is increased of up to 50%, then the respective grid connection procedure will have priority over other procedures. The idea being that installations that are soon to be commissioned are actually repowered and continue to produce. Overall, I think these were the most important amendments. And also one important thing which is related to our next topic is the fact that everybody with a preliminary grid connection agreement or a final connection agreement will be able to add an annex to its connection agreement regarding the connection of an electricity storage facility if the capacity at the connection point is not increased. And this is a very good proposal and provision, because it will actually allow for a lot of developers to add a storage component, which gets us to our next topic and the upcoming auctions for the development of new capacities of renewable installations combined with electricity storage facilities. This is a project that is developed under the Recovery and Resilience Plan of Bulgaria. The idea is to stimulate new capacities of renewables, but only if they're combined with a storage component. And the main goal here is to ensure that when more and more renewable installations are put into the system, and gradually the thermal and coal-powered installations are decommissioned, there will be enough storage facilities in the systems to actually help with the balancing. what's important here, and what is maybe different than a lot of other EU countries, is that the Bulgarian government opted for investment aid instead of operational aid, because in a lot of other countries we see contract for differences for certain periods of time. However, here the idea is to subsidize only the storage component of the investment project, and investment aid support may be granted up to 100% of the capital cost of the electricity storage facility. The details regarding this auction are still under consideration, and all the auction documentation is supposed to be published shortly, like maybe next week, or for public consultations, so that the investors and developers can give their inputs to refine all the. Overall, it seems like a really interesting project, because obviously the development of electricity storage facilities is difficult, purely based on expected market revenues. So here I think it's a good decision by the Bulgarian government to actually subsidize the storage component. I think that's it for me for now, and happy to discuss any questions you may have further.
Thank you, Dimitar. Thank you also for outlining really what's happening right now in the Bulgarian market. Before I go to the next presentation, there was already one question in particular for yours, and it was with regards to the bonds that you were mentioning. And the question is, if you could explain a little bit, what do you mean by bonds based on provided capacity? And I think this was about the grid connection in order to avoid speculation.
Yeah, exactly. Well, for example, if you apply for a 10 megawatt capacity, a 10 megawatt solar power plant, then for each megawatt, you have to provide a bond in the amount of 25,000 leva, or approximately 26,000 euro. This bond must be provided within 3 months after you get your connection statement with all the technical conditions of how your power plant can be connected. And now this bond is a requirement, because if you do not provide it within the expected time period, then your connection procedure is terminated. The idea being that only serious investors are granted connection capacities. I know it also comes with more difficult financial obligations, but I think considering our market and all the speculation with grid capacities and the big competition regarding a capacity for connection, I think this is actually a good measure.
Thank you for clarifying that, Dimitar. And I would like to invite now to come up on our virtual stage, Sasha and Dimitar. Will revisit the debate at the end of the webinar, so thank you for that. And Sasha, you'll continue our deep dive into the regulatory of certain countries with a Croatian energy framework. So you can take it away. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Lorena. Just briefly to introduce a few numbers that are relevant to understand the Croatian market. So as you can see on the screen, the latest numbers show that solar power plants account to 2.2% of the total energy mix in the production. The energy production has raised significantly, almost doubled from the last year at the same time, and we see that this trend is growing. So essentially, we expect to see an additional number of power plants, or additional megawatts being put online by the end of this year. So this will be in the range of 460, or basically half a gigawatt by the end of this year. This is where we stand now, and to understand essentially how we got here, it's important to understand that in 2021 there was a change in the Croatian legislation aimed predominantly at introducing additional order in the project development, in essentially allowing investors to develop their projects. This entire overhaul of the creation legislation was supposed to be accompanied by implementing acts within 6 months of passing this legislation. So essentially, we should have had this in the May of 2022, but this entire process was substantially extended in a way that even today we do not have all of the parameters that the project developers need to implement their projects. One of those new requirements that were implemented in 2021, but were only given effect in July this year, was the energy permit. So the energy permit was introduced as a new concept that was required for the construction of new facilities, and that basically requires all developers to build their power plants in 7 years. It cannot be extended, so basically in these 7 years you are required to get the usage permit. There are also interim deadlines for project development, so you have to get the location permit in 3 years and the building permit in 5 years. Projects which are being developed in a specific way, and this is that there is public land. Basically, publicly owned land means owned by the Republic of Croatia or by the local government units. And in those cases where the investor has not conducted has not resolved the ownership relations on its own, there was a prior public tender required to actually get the energy permit. So this was required for many reasons, but the most important reason is that there were competing projects in the same area. So you would have different projects with different technologies applying in the same region, in the same area, and it was obvious that you could not physically place all of these projects in the same area, but for planning purposes, for grid connection purposes, the transmission system operator had to plan it or had to take them into account as if all of them are going to be developed, even though this was not possible. So to introduce some order, and because many of these projects were located in the land which was publicly owned, basically the Croatian government introduced this energy permit. So this is required obviously for all new projects, but there was also a transitional period for those projects which were kind of already permitted to a certain advanced period, and which could have been put online, let's say, in a simplified procedure. All of this has essentially created a little bit of confusion in the market. Who is required to do what, and what kind of approval or kind of process you need to go through. And essentially, many of the investors filed for their approvals, and by January 2022, there were 216 projects who applied. This is not only solar projects, but renewable energy projects altogether who applied to get this energy approval. Their aggregate power was in the range of 6 gigawatts. And this is for the existing projects, and the Croatian government until now has rejected almost half of those, so 2.7 were dismissed as essentially non-feasible, or projects which who do not have a future. For the rest, there was already some public tenders conducted for approximately 700 megawatts. There were energy approvals already issued for 74 solar projects with the aggregate capacity of 1.1 gigawatts. So these are the projects which had to undergo all of this process for the energy approval. So basically, there is some movement, although there is a lot still to be done. So when you actually apply for the tender, because there typically will be, as I said, competing projects in the tender, there are rules under the tender there are criteria under which these energy approvals are awarded. You can see them on the screen. So basically, there is a component of the price that you offer for the to get the energy permit. There is also a component of the price that you pay to the local self-government unit as basically their compensation to pay the land, or you give them participation rights in the project. So this is also being evaluated. Technologies are being evaluated in some cases. Energy efficiency is evaluated. The construction period, basically your commitment to develop a project in a certain period, is also being evaluated. So this is a process that you need to undergo. Again, if you have projects, if you are developing projects predominantly on project land, I think that this will be the situation in most of the cases. So energy permit has been a bottleneck for a long time. As I said, it took us almost more than a year and a half to get from the law to the implementing bylaw. So this is in place since July this year. Obviously, a lot of questions still remain under the process, and will have to be answered as the process develops. But this has, for a long time, been a bottleneck, which is now, let's say, mostly removed, as you know, the rules of the game are known. So, having removed this bottleneck, we are coming up to the next bottleneck. The next bottleneck is the rules of connection to the transmission grid. So, the rules have also been long anticipated for a long period of time. They are in force for a month now, and have raised also a number of questions how things should progress under these new rules. On your screen, you can see the key milestones. There are only a few milestones here that you can see on the screen that require you to need to go. But the main point is that there is already now a lot of criticism for this, for the new rules. The main criticism that comes from this is twofold. First of all, there are very long periods granted to the transmission system operator to decide on each one of these steps in the grid connection procedure. So when you add them all up, it is possible and it is likely that these transmission system or the grid connection procedures might take between 9 and 12 months, which is incredibly long in project development. This procedure, it's in itself, or these provisions in itself, the very long periods, have come under a heavy attack by all developers, saying that this is much too long and that all of this should be much more streamlined, and that the entire procedure should take much shorter than these 12 months. Another one of these, let's say, peculiar provisions in the grid connection rules is essentially that there is a window during which you can actually file to get information that you require for the preparation of your further steps. And this is the period from 1 to 15 May each year. So if you miss it, you have to wait for another year to file for this. Why this is the case, you know, we can only speculate, but I think probably the reason is that the capacity of the transmission system operator to deal with this requests simultaneously is somewhat limited, and this was meant to introduce the discipline into developers to kind of think through their applications, to prepare them properly, and to avoid filing for incomplete filings and with connection requests, which essentially then create the backlog or burden the administration in a way that prevents really tangible or let's say well-prepared, well-thought-out projects from proceeding. Dealing with administrative capacities or the lack thereof is one of the key bottlenecks in development of all projects. So the key takeaway here is that even if we are to provide for stricter deadlines, for shorter deadlines, what good will it do if you don't have actually the administrative capacity to deal with these requests. We are seeing a lot of interest in the market. Investors are used to dealing with these requests, so or to dealing with these obstacles. But the question is, if you don't have the administrative capacity in the transmission system operator, in various other authorities, in the authorities that deal with environmental permitting, then whatever we put in the law is just not going to be, it's just going to stay on paper. We are not going to see it in practice. So one of the key requests from the investors that we are seeing is actually to the government, not necessarily to change the legislation, which is always the case, but it's immediately the immediate next request is to actually increase the administrative capacity to deal with all of these requests. The next point to discuss is what we have as available incentives. So the change in law in 2001 changed the game in a way that we moved away from the feed-in tariff system to the systems of the guaranteed offtake price, which is primarily reserved for smaller plants, and the market premium system, which is now the predominant, let's say, system of incentivizing production. So the market premium, very similar in many other countries, is a CFD. So essentially, the contract for difference, in a way that there is a tender under which the developers or the generators produce or offer production price, which is then agreed or built into the contract, and depending on the market fluctuations of the actual market price, the difference is paid depending on whether you are in the plus or in the minus, is compensated between Hrota, who is the market operator and in charge of implementing these contracts for difference, and the eligible producer. So these contracts are concluded for 12 years. There are many documents that you are required to submit as proof that you are, let's say, eligible to participate in the tender. This is meant to eliminate those projects which are still at a very early stage, at the inception stage of the project. So you need to prove that you have progressed to a certain point in development. You also need to submit proof that you are financially of good standing, in the sense that you also have to produce a bank guarantee that supports your claim. And all of this is laid out in the rules that are publicly available, and basically create a clear playing field for all participants. Until now, we have had only one tender for awarding the market premium. It did not meet expectations simply because it was, in my view, launched at a time where the electricity prices in the market were spiking. The producers were not willing to participate in these schemes, considering the market conditions. We have also seen that some producers which had long-term feed-in tariff contracts were stepping out of these contracts and basically not selling the electricity to the government, to Hrota at a fixed price, but actually trying their luck in the market with the spiking prices. So at that very volatile stage of the market, this initial tender did not produce the expected results. But what we are expecting to see now is essentially new tender. Hrota did conduct a public consultation with the market during August 23. The interested participants were able to submit their views and positions on how this new tender should be launched. These were due until the 10th of September this year, and the new public tender, which should hopefully take into account the market position on this, is expected during this month. And it will be very interesting to see how this works. Apart from this public state incentive, we also see a lot of interest by the off-takers, potential off-takers for commercial PPAs. There is a lot of discussion. There are the PPA market in Croatia is not fully yet established. We have seen several developments over the past couple of years. The first, let's say, standard corporate PPA was signed fairly recently, albeit it was for a wind farm, but we see a lot of interest from many companies who are either trying to decarbonize or reach their ESG goals in the PPA market. So this is, I think, a very positive driver for developments in Croatia. And we actually see, despite all of these obstacles that we are seeing and the bottlenecks, we are still seeing a very high interest of investors to do their projects in Croatia, to develop PV projects in Croatia. And I think that we have reasons to be optimistic about this. So that's it for my presentation, Lorena.
Perfect. Thank you, Sasha, for really diving deep into what's the status in the Croatian market and what are the impacts of the last tender, perhaps how it can change the future tender. And we've received some questions already concerning your presentation, but we'll reach them at the end when we're all together. And for now, I'd like to then give the floor to Petar, who will be our next speaker, and now diving deep into the Serbian market before we close off with the questions altogether. Thank you, Petar. Take it away.
Thank you, Lorena. Okay, now I have control over the presentation. Good morning again from my side. I will try to be as brief as possible so that we have more time for the presentation. Historically, solar power plants, solar power has not been very popular in Serbia. The main reason for that is that during 2010s, all renewables projects developed and constructed in Serbia have been based on feed-in tariff. And the governments back then decided to limit significantly the capacity of the solar power plants that are eligible for feed-in tariff. So for basically in the period of more than 10 years, from 2009, where the first incentive scheme kicked in, we've seen less than 20 megawatts of solar power plants installed throughout the country. However, that started changing in April 2021. At that time, the government, the National Assembly, adopted the new law on use of renewable sources, the law that was supposed to facilitate and support the green transition of the country and economy in general, and provided for different mechanics to do so. First of them being reforming the system of incentives from feed-in tariff to market premium, introduction of the concept of prosumer for the first time in Serbian legislation, introduction of possibility to develop projects in specific pathways through strategic partnerships, and a number of others that were supposed to support the transition. The law itself was welcomed by a wider community, investors, developers, lenders, international organizations, and it really seemed like it is going to be a winner. However, soon after that, it became apparent that there are conceptual misunderstandings about future of the sector between the officials of the Ministry of Mining and Energy back then and the most important stakeholders in the sector, being the TSO and public utility EPS. And as a result of that miscommunication and differences, we've basically seen almost 2 years of stagnation in the sector where we didn't have any concrete move in relation to the implementation of the rules introduced by the law, apart from maybe prosumers. Prosumers are a big success, I would say, even in that period of stagnation. To put into context, for more than 10 years of existence of feed-in tariff, we had less than 20 megawatts of solar installed in Serbia. For only 2 years during validity of an existence of the concept of the prosumers, only as prosumers, 35 megawatts of solar power plants were installed. But this is an exception. Everything else was, I would say, a missed opportunity. And it remained so until the change of the government and election of the new ministry, which basically apparently managed to find a compromise solution with these stakeholders I was mentioning, with DPS, our public utility, and the TSO being Elektromreža Serbia. As a result of that compromise, Serbia became again, energy in Serbia became again hot topic, with two of these being the hottest. One are the auctions for awarding of premiums, contracts for difference premiums, and the other being the connection. One is rather successful and let's say leaving the good taste after, while the other one, the connection, there are some different views on how it is going to look further. So I will first start with the success story. So finally, 2 years after the adoption of the law that introduced the possibility for awarding CFD premiums, Serbia organized the first auctions for wind and for solar. The first auctions were organized during summer. 14th of June was the launch date. They lasted 60 days until 14 August. The offered capacity for these auctions for solar was 50 megawatts, and the ceiling price 90 euros per megawatt, which is relatively high considering the market movements especially in the first half of this year. So the auctions were relatively successful. About half of the capacity was awarded. As you can see on the table, the bidding prices were relatively high. So close to the ceiling price, 88.65 euros per megawatt hour being the reference. The strike price is significantly high, especially considering that example for wind, which is generally more expensive and more complex technology, the highest price was somewhere around 74 euros. As I told you, half of the capacity was awarded, on a bit more than half, 25.2 megawatt out of 50. And now probably the questions that interest the audience more, what's the plan for the future? So in the next 2 years, the government plans to hold 2 more rounds. First one in 2024, probably March, for which 100 megawatt of installed capacity will be awarded. Plus, the government has the option to increase this capacity for the undistributed portion. So we could count in 2024 for the auctions for solar somewhere around 125 megawatts and additional 150 megawatts in 2025. The auction process was rather transparent, completely electronical, and it was welcomed by all the participants in the sector. Now, the second point where we still do have some misunderstandings and is not unified is the grid connection. As a result of the reform I was mentioning in the beginning, the renewables became very popular in Serbia, especially as the investment opportunity. A lot of people realized or thought it is a chance for earning fast money. And because of that, in more than 2 years of application of this law, the TSO received requests for connection of more than 25.5 gigawatts of new renewables capacities. Just to put into context, total installed capacity in Serbia is around 8.5. So this is more than two times higher compared to the total installed capacity, which is apparently unrealistic. Out of these, more than half is related to solar. Solar, as I told you, was historically underdeveloped, but considering different factors and in particular cheapening of the technology, solar became more popular in the last couple of years than wind. And it became the issue, what is going to be happening with all these requests? The TSO cannot connect, then the system in Serbia apparently does not have capacity to inject the entire capacities that were requested. So the government decided to strengthen the terms for connection and to strengthen them significantly. Out of these 11.6, somewhere 400 megawatts will not be subject to these new requirements, but the remaining 11.2 and all the others that will come in the future will be subject to these new requirements. And the requirements are significant. Briefly, every new power plant will need to ensure that they have additional capacities for provision of ancillary services. In most cases, it will be integrated battery storage. The battery storage that needs to be of installed capacity of 10% compared to the power plant for which the connection is requested, and has the working capacity of 1.4 megawatt hours per megawatt of installed capacity of the power plant. It will definitely have negative impact on capex. It is yet to be seen how the projects that are going to be financed on project finance basis are going to handle this. But considering that this is all relatively new, it hasn't been tested in practice, and interesting times are ahead of us in that respect. The other requirements have just been adopted. Last Thursday, so 7 days ago, the government adopted the new decree regulating the terms for connection and strengthened them further. The costs for preparation of the grid connection study are now higher. The TSO, wanting to battle unrealistic projects, insisted on introduction of performance bond that basically guarantees that the applicant will be finalizing the project within certain periods of time, prescribed periods of time, and needs to deliver security for that. It's similar like in Bulgaria, what Dimitar was mentioning. So in Serbia, it will be 25,000 euros per megawatt of installed capacity, which needs to be delivered in a rather early stage of the development of the project. So basically, one of the initial steps, which will also be a notable burden for the investors and applicants, maybe some different approach where lower amounts would be delivered that early and increasing as the project goes further would be more realistic, but this was the option that the government opted for. And finally, the deadlines for realization of the projects have been significantly shortened. Basically, in the current or in the old regime, once you reach the construction permit, you didn't have any real deadline in terms of connection when you're going to finalize that. In theory, you could have the connection approval for more than 10 years without even starting the construction. However, now it's changed. So the deadlines are now stricter. The investors will need to obtain the construction permit and grid connection approval within 3 years following the conclusion of the grid connection agreement, which is basically concluded immediately after the grid connection study. After that, the initial validity of the grid connection approval will be 3 years, and it can be extended only once for additional period of 2 years. In the previous regime, the one that's going in history, the extensions were basically unlimited. So this will definitely put some order into the connection process, but the requirements, I would say, are maybe too TSO centric, maybe not completely investment friendly. So that's it from me. I hope I stayed with them the time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Petar. And indeed, great to hear that after this period of stagnation in Serbia, there's now a lot happening. I imagine you're much busier than you might have been in the previous 2 years. But I'd like to invite Dimitar and Sasha back on stage so that we can go over some of the questions we received from the audience following this overview of what's happening in Bulgaria, Serbia, and Croatia. I will kick things off with a question that popped up during your presentation, Sasha. And this question is regarding the grid connection fees. And the question is, are the grid connection fees covering the grid capex? So, for example, the line or substation, or does the investor need to cover this additionally?
I'm sorry. The question was: is the covering grid connection? The grid connection fee is, or the methodology grid connection fee is has been passed, but the grid connection fee itself has not yet been determined. So this is one of the additional key bottlenecks that is currently missing. Is currently still missing in the framework. This is still one of those elements that should have been done. It's not done yet. It's the reason for this is the requirement for the DSO and the TSO to be aligned on this. So this part is still missing.
I see. Well, then another follow-up question throughout your presentation was about, you mentioned the corporate PPA that had recently been signed, this first one. And is it, I don't know if this is possible, but to share more or less what was the price that was signed for this first corporate PPA?
What is the price?
Yes, yeah, that's one. Or maybe the price per megawatts.
Yeah, the price is not public. So essentially, all of these PPAs are not essentially public. The price was not disclosed, but what we do know that this is a virtual PPA. So basically, it's not a physical PPA or sleep PPA. It's a virtual PPA. So the strike price that was agreed on this is not publicly disclosed.
That makes sense. But I'm curious to hear from Dimitar or Peter if you also see a growing interest, or do you potentially see this growing interest from corporate off-takers in the PPA markets of your respective countries? And either of you can.
Let's start with Bulgaria. Yeah, definitely we see more interest in the corporate PPA market. For now, the actual PPA agreements that are signed are from large consumers and very few, but definitely we see an increase. And I think also a key element into the PPA market will be the possibility to trade guarantees of origin also between member states, which is now also a big topic with all market participants who are active on this market. We recently tried to structure a cross-border PPA, of course, virtual PPA, and always we get the question: can we also sell the guarantees of origin, and do they make any kind of commercial sense? For now, the answer it's rather no. But it's also important to know that the Bulgarian organized power exchange soon will release a separate segment just for trading guarantees of origin, and I think this will facilitate much more all those agreements. Yeah, thank you.
No, that's a great clarification. I don't know, Peter, if you'd like to add on to that, or I can also jump to another question.
Just briefly, yes. Significant interest for at least two reasons. First, EPS state utility dominates the market. Coal generation dominates the generation mix of EPS. EPS does not have enough coal, so as a result, it needs to import the coal, and because of the outages we had 2 years ago, it is currently unable to offer long-term terms for supply. So this year only, we will be having EPS offering 3 different prices over the period of 12 months, which for any kind of business planning is like a complete nonsense. The other thing is the cross-border adjustment mechanism that started in the European Union. The exporters, especially exporters to EU markets, will need to find a way how to make their production processes greener in order not to lose competitive advantage on the EU market when exporting there.
I see. And then, Peter, I'll actually stick with you for a question that came in particular during your presentation. And the question for you is, are new grid connection rules applied for old connection requests in order to eliminate those projects, or only for the new ones?
They apply on all connection requests that were filed after April 2021.
After April 2021. All right, that's a good clarification, because indeed it was a question of eliminating these ghost projects or not. And that helps clarify. And before we close off the webinar, I just want to inform the audience that we're also sharing a discount code for the event. So for everyone who attended the webinar, you get a little help there for the event itself. But I'll see if I can get through the questions as quickly as I can before we close things off today. We have a question here about whether there are any incentives on these markets, particularly from the governments, in order to attract foreign investors. So these could be from elsewhere in Western Europe or beyond. So do you think that there is a particular emphasis put on attracting foreign investors?
Well, apart from general incentive systems, which is now basically CFD premium, that's it. There are no some sort of specific cash subsidies, or I don't know, free or charge land. I think it would be even prohibited from the regional state aid regulations that these kind of state aid cannot be given for the energy sector. And also considering that even if it would be allowed, these kind of incentives in Serbia usually work only for work-intensive projects, which renewables projects are not. So I would not expect these kind of incentives. Maybe in the future there will be some specific incentives for agri-solar.
Perfect, that's clear. And by the way, the person who asked this question, and the person who asked this question wanted to say thank you very much for the interesting presentations. So that's a nice feedback for all three of you. I do recognize that we're coming into the end of this hour, and you've shared a lot of information. Sasha, for example, I'm very curious to know whether that 2-week window to access the permitting for the grid will be extended or not. It seems kind of crazy that in the end you have to wait a whole year if you don't manage to fit that 2-week window. And Peter, it's clear that in Serbia there's now a lot of potential for new projects to come online. And we'll be discussing a lot more what's happening in Bulgaria at the event itself. But in case the three of you would like to share any final message, any final words, now's the time before we close things off.
Yeah. Okay. So just to respond to your question, will it be changed? I think probably yes. There is a lot of interest or a lot of pressure from all interested developers to change these grid connection rules is overly restricted. The question that will remain, is the factual question. The question that whether the grid can intake all of these projects, whether you can connect them or not. What are the requirements that apart from grid upgrades that take a long time, that take a lot of money, what can be done to allow the uptake of all of these new generation capacities to the grid? So that is the key question. That's not only our question, that's a question across Europe. But changing the laws itself will not be enough. As I said, you can change these deadlines, you can make them stricter. But as we have seen in other cases, such as environmental permitting, the laws say give us specific deadlines, but then these are surpassed by 4 to 6 times. So the government itself does not stick to their own deadlines. So we should ask ourselves, what's the reason for this? And I think the reason is the absence of administrative capacities. And unless we understand that this energy transition is a strategic objective and that it should be accompanied by the state investment, not only in infrastructure, but also in people who are dealing with these requests and resolving this, we can put whatever we want in the laws. If the government doesn't keep up with the administrative capacities to implement those, we are not doing anything.
That's indeed a great point. And looking at the importance of the energy transition, not just when we're looking at the laws, but in the sense of it's a responsibility. So we should give it the human resources necessary. Thank you, Sasha. Dimitar and Peter, thank you so much. If you'd like to say a few words, do let me know. But I think you've also shared a lot of information throughout the webinar, and it was a pleasure to also learn from the three of you. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you to the attendees. Hopefully see you in the future.
Bye. See
Bye-bye.
you in Sofia.
See you in Sofia.
Bye.